Hi there, and welcome to the Homestead Education Podcast. Do you have a homestead, farm, or just dream of a rural life? This is a show to help you and your kids grow your own food and grow as a person. I'm your host, Kody Hanner. I'm a homesteader, homeschool mom of six, and small town enthusiast. I was raised by an old school rancher and blessed by the grace of God to have been exposed to so much of what rural life has to offer. Join me every week to talk about homesteading, homeschooling, and growth with a homestead education. Hi, and welcome back. I just want to remind you that you can get all of my homestead science books on my website for a new way of teaching agriculture to today's youth and aspiring homesteaders by focusing on small-scale farming and self-sufficiency. If you're a school or co-op and need invoicing, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Hey guys, I have missed you. So, I ended up deciding to take like a month off from podcasting to be able to finish my book on raising self-sufficient kids. It was a really good choice because it enabled me to really focus on those deadlines, and working with my editor to meet a release date that we had in mind, which is here. It'll be available on Amazon October 1st and is available on my website now. It says that it'll ship in September. And I mean, I'm literally like, as orders come in, I'm shipping them through my print company now. So if you decide you want to hop over there, I'll be sure to link that. It is such a, it's an inspirational book. It's called Raising Self-Sufficient Kids, An Honest Mom's Guide to Intentional Parenting. And it's a lot of our story of how like our family came to be, raising our kids, our trials, our triumphs, like how my husband and I were raised, all the research we've done. And it's really just parenting from a view that I haven't seen in all of my research before. Like just bottom line, um, parental advice from another mom, not from a psychiatrist standpoint, not from, a gentle parenting standpoint. It is very straightforward. Here's some really great ways to get your kids to meet expectations, but not just meet them, want to meet them, which in turn, if you're somebody who is interested in like the homesteading, self-sufficiency, that type of thing, that's how you get your children on board is through education, conversation, and expectations. So be sure to hop over and grab that because it's a good one. So uh next I am going to be going at Homesteaders of America. Man, the last month I've been just bouncing around. Like I was at the Ozarks Homesteading Conference the first week of September. Came home, turned around, went to a local market called Market in the Mountains. It's a really fun event in the PNW where it's kind of like luxury Western shopping. But the PNW we're really becoming known for that's the Pacific Northwest. We're really becoming known for a lot of homeschoolers. And so I felt like that would just be an event to meet kind of the more Western rodeo crowd versus like the Homestead Expo type crowd. And there's not a lot of homesteading style events on the West Coast. So it was really exciting to be able to find something like that. So I enjoyed it. But 2 weeks, we're heading off to Homesteaders of America, where I'm going to be speaking on homeschooling like a homesteader. And I am just overjoyed to be on the stage at HOA. I mean, it's really been one of my like bucket list, I don't know, not bucket list, like vision board style um goals. And so just really excited to be there this year. I have some really great surprises for you guys. So and the surprises will be available for everybody after HOA, but if you're at HOA, make sure you swing by the booth and check out my newest thing because it's gonna be cool. Uh next, so I kind of like part of why I decided to take a month off from podcasting. My last episode, I talked to you about like while we were on a trip that our pressure tank for our well had gone out. And we had like a teenage girl here watching the house, and she like had to deal with hauling water for the animals. Like it was a mess. So we had the pressure tank replaced. And what started happening is our plumbing, and not like necessarily our house plumbing, but like all the spigots around our property are pretty old. Like this property, I mean, we have one of the cabins on our property from when our town was like originally homesteaded. So I mean, I think our plumbing for that stuff's like 100 years old. So what ended up happening is once our pressure tank was up to pressure that it really should have been this whole time, it started blowing out all of our spigots, which thank goodness it happened in the summertime because we've had to dig up like 6 feet down to several of them. And some of them we couldn't get an excavator in. So like, because it was like in between two buildings and stuff. So we had to hand dig those. And it's just really been a mess. It's cost a lot of money. I mean, it's just one of those things that you deal with as a homesteader, home ownership, really in general. Um, but it's taken a lot of our time. So we're I'm glad that we had that availability for a little while, like that my schedule was a little bit more lax. Um, with that, or with that, I don't even know if it's with that. Why did I say that? So my husband and I, our anniversary falls every year for HOA. But this year, we're actually like flying out on our anniversary. So we were able to spend this last weekend at that market as like a little anniversary trip for us. It was really nice. The kids handled the farm and we took a couple of days. It was a work trip, but at least we just got to spend some time alone. And I think that's really important to remember to do as a homesteader because even when you like your spouse, when you're working with them all the time like that, um, there just there comes a point where you kind of get to frustration, you get some burnout going on, especially when you're doing it with the kids all the time. And so I mean, just make sure you're taking that time to spend with your spouse. That doesn't mean you have to take off for a whole weekend. A lot of times as homesteaders, we don't have that opportunity or availability with our animals. But even evening outs or evenings out, or feed the animals and then go get a hotel in town or something, just to have something different, some alone time, especially if you have kids and like maybe older ones that can babysit or, have a grandparent come sit with everybody. It's just really important to make sure you're doing that. And I just wanted to say that to you guys. Um, and be intentional about it. Like tell your spouse, like, we need time alone. Like, let's do this. Like, it doesn't have to be a secret. You don't have to like hint around to have them um schedule, like a surprise date night out or something. And sometimes like even dating can be expensive. Not everybody can afford an evening out. Like make sandwiches and go for a drive down to the river or something. I mean, that's just as important. So make sure you're making time for that. It makes everything else in life a lot easier. So today I want to talk about rural childhoods. My book is not that's coming out is not only about teaching sustainability skills. Although I do discuss that a lot of it is just about how to get kids in the right mindset. And I think that there's something to be said for kids that are raised rurally. And I know that there's a downside to rural living but I think that the positivity of it and how parents are raising their kids has just a huge impact on why rural childhoods can just, outweigh like the urban ones and even suburban ones. I mean, I definitely grew up rurally, kind of like rural suburban in that window. I mean, my parents were divorced. I lived with my mom on an acre, but I was in 4-H. I My friends and I, like when we got licenses, like on Saturdays we're all rolling our trucks up into the mountains to practice target shooting and stuff. Like we were definitely rural kids. But we did, live in you know, a small town. It was a small town, but I mean, we had all the amenities there, within an hour drive, we could be shopping at like a big mall and stuff. Like, so, I mean, we weren't that rural. Like, my kids are growing up pretty rural right now, where we're 40 minutes from even a grocery store, an hour and a half from a Walmart, and 2 to 3 hours from any type of like large shopping or medical centers and that type of thing. So, they're definitely have much more of a rural life even than I did. Um, But what kind of like sparked me wanting to have this conversation about rural childhoods is that I read a book recently, and I think I've even mentioned it on here before. And I'm not even going to talk about the name of the book because I think it taught a lot of great things, but I did not love the author's perspective on it. And one of the things that she says, like right at the beginning of the book, is that she was just blown away that she went to visit another country and that a teenage girl got up like during her spring break and just did the dishes because they needed to be done. And I was like, you don't have to go to another country to find that. Like, just check out like rural America. Like, that is how most of these kids are being raised. And I mean, honestly, it's happening, in suburban and urban and stuff, but I feel like there's a little bit of a gap there where in some of that, like keeping up with the Joneses and that type of stuff, it's like the kids end up having more of an entitlement mindset where rural kids just have to work harder. And I'm not saying they're better. Like, it's just there's a little bit more focus on the family and stuff like that that makes it where that is just nature for rural kids. Not all of them, but the stark majority of them. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with who your kids spend their time with. Now, they always say like, who are the five people that you spend the most time with have the most effect on you? That's your kids, that's you, that's everybody. At this point, though, most people can't necessarily name people they're hanging out with because it's like social media, video games, streaming on TV. Then there's probably a friend, maybe a couple, or kind of just like this weird kind of counterculture that's happening. And it's yeah, it's supposed to be like the people you spend the most time with, but I don't think it's even really people at this point. It's entities. And honestly, when I was thinking about this, like as parents, why aren't we number one on that list? When you think about who your kids spend the most time with and who has the most influence on them, why aren't you number one? And I mean, that comes a lot with homeschooling, but I look at like my childhood from the time I was old enough to be home alone. Like my mom was a single mom. This isn't like a hit on, it's a cultural thing. Especially like in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, we were latchkey kids. Like we were raising ourselves. Um, I My mom went to work before I even got up to catch the bus or drive to school, depending on age. I went to school all day. I pretty much managed myself. I mean, got my, did my homework, turned my homework in. I mean, we had teachers pushing us, but a lot of that was really self-driven. I'd go home after school. Once I was in high school, a lot of times I'd have a job after school. I'd go home. A lot of times my mom wasn't even home yet. I'd do my homework if I had church or like youth group or 4-H or a plan with a friend or a ball game or something that I was going to. After I did my homework, I would take off and go to that. If I was gonna be home, sometimes my stepdad would get home from work before my mom. Sometimes he wouldn't. They both worked in construction. So a lot of times I would start dinner, especially in my teens. My mom would get home and it would pretty much just be like, did you do your homework? How was school? Good night. And that was the extent of me being parented. And then on the weekends I was off with my friends, like whether they were at the house or we were off doing something with them. And so I mean, I can honestly say that the biggest influence in my life was not my parents. And that's not from anything they did wrong. That was literally our culture at the time. Now I look at the relationship that I have with my children. I am, my husband and I are the biggest influences on our kids. We spend the most time with them, we do the most things with them. And we have an amazing relationship with our kids, like one that I could have never even imagined with my either of my parents. So, I mean that's homeschooling, that's not necessarily rural childhoods, but I even think that in I know in like more suburban and urban areas, there was more options for like after school programs and boys and girls clubs and things like that that we just didn't have when I was a kid. And honestly, if I still lived in that area, like my kids wouldn't be enrolled in something like that because the only boys and girls club was completely on the south end of town from where our like rural community was. So I mean, that would be over a half hour drive. Like my kids wouldn't be going there. Um, so it's just really something to consider when you're looking at how the amount of time you're spending with your kids and who their influences are. Now, if you aren't spending time with your kids, you don't know who those other influences are. If you are, then you have, I don't even want to say control, but as parents, we do have to have that level of control of who our kids are spending time with. But it's not a control quote, like for those who are only listening, I'm using like hand quotes. It's not a controlling thing, it's parenting. And parenting is knowing what your kids are doing and guiding that influence. So I think I kind of got like really off track on like the rural part of it, but when you live more rurally, you know more of what your kids are doing. Like whether it's just because there isn't a million different things for them to be doing all the time, or if they are out doing something, someone's reporting back to you what your kids are doing. So people just have different relationships like that when you live rurally. Now, if you live in a suburban or urban area, you can recreate like that kind of rural community by keeping your circle small. Um, and just really knowing what your kids are doing, paying attention to what they're doing online. There's a lot of people who don't even let their children have access to like the outside world, like via social media, because it's insane right now. And I don't blame them. And I don't feel like that's like sheltering or hiding their kids from anything. It's protecting them from this nonsense. But, personally, like we have 15-year-old twins and we let them have social media, but we do that while they're at home so that we can guide them on what they're seeing. They're not really sucked into like what their friends are doing and that type of thing because they aren't out gallivanting around. They use social media to send funny like homeschool memes back and forth to each other and that type of thing. It's My daughter gets a lot of recipes from social media. So, um, I feel really comfortable with what they're doing on it, but just really it's about your kid. If you feel like they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, they don't need to be on it. And it doesn't matter like how bad they're gonna fight you. So now some of the bigger concerns of a rural childhood. And I jotted these down because, I've heard them. Like I'm online a lot, really talking about like, I'm a huge proponent of rural living and having your children live a rural life. And I get a lot of backlash on it. And so I wrote down the things that people um, mentioned. And I just want to talk about them for a minute, like each one. So the biggest one is drugs. Uh, yeah, sometimes there isn't a lot to do in rural communities and kids get involved in drugs. They do in urban and suburban areas too. This is not a rural issue. This is an everywhere issue. And in fact, where we live rurally, we just now started having fentanyl issues locally. So it took a good 3 years for it to get here. So like our kids had 3 years of like fentanyl counseling, fentanyl warning. For those of you who don't know what fentanyl is, I mean, I'm sure it's so big right now, but it was just a painkiller. Now it's being processed and like laced into all sorts of drugs, and a very, very small amount of it can actually be fatal. And so, I mean, to the point like my father-in-law had surgery recently. It was just a really basic surgery. He had some shrapnel from Vietnam, like kind of work its way to the surface, and they had to go cut it out. I mean, I don't remember if it was outpatient or not, but it was, a pretty simple surgery, like no more than like an abscess or something like that. And that's basically what it was. And when he went and picked up his, like he had to pick up antibiotics and painkillers, and then they had this other one there that he didn't know what it was, and like his insurance didn't cover it, but he just went ahead and paid for it because he didn't know what he was grabbing. And he got home and called us, and they had prescribed him Narcan, which is the drug reversal injection, with his like Vicodin, or his painkiller that he picked up. Like, do they think he's gonna go home and take all of them, or is there gonna be fentanyl in that? Like, I don't know. But either way, I mean, to just pick up your regular painkillers after a surgery and then get Narcan with that, like, it's a little out there. But basically, what I'm saying is our kids have had 3 years of fentanyl warning and training before it really became an issue in our county. So it's still here, but at least our kids are a little bit more savvy to it. Um, Hopefully it stays that way. And I say our kids, I mean, that's my kids, that's kids in town, that's other rural communities that are probably only just now starting to see the effects of something like fentanyl as well. There was drugs in my community when I was a kid. There's drugs in my community now. There's drugs in the cities. Like, I don't, like I said, it is not a rural epidemic. It's everywhere. So, and I honestly think that rural kids, yeah, they spend a little more time alone. Sometimes they're out doing dumb stuff in the woods and stuff like that. But there's more of a chance that another adult or a conscientious friend is gonna like nip some of these things in the bud. Now, as they go into adulthood, I have seen a lot of, like addiction to like what they call crank and things like that that can get really bad and just like control people's lives. I haven't spent a lot of time in um urban areas. I mean, I drive through them, I see the homeless camps and that type of stuff, but I don't know. I honestly just don't know what issues are being dealt with. But the things I've seen tell me that it's worse in urban and possibly suburban areas than it is in rural communities, in a different way. Uh, then, and I think like what we see is there like maybe less homelessness in rural communities, but then more I don't want to like go to the trailer park thing because there's some really nice trailer parks. But like, like a group of single wides that's got, 20 people in them and cops showing up and lady hanging out the window, don't take him, I love him. Like, I don't know. I mean, even if you ever listen to some Jeff Foxworthy back in the day, maybe you'll get that joke. But um I don't think that drugs is really an argument for the rural childhoods. The next one is gangs. And there there's kings and cities. Like, I don't even know why you can say that there's a difference between um rural and like city living when it comes to gangs. Um I know where I live. I've never seen any type of gang activity up in North Idaho, but uh, I mean, a lot of what I've seen in gang activity tends to be in the minorities, and there's not as many minorities in North Idaho. I'm not even saying it's you just see more prevalence in that. I grew up in a community that was primarily Hispanic and Native American. It was in Northern California where we had lots of reservations, we had a lot of migrant workers. And yeah, there was tons of gang activity where I lived, and I lived in a tiny town. But very few white kids were involved in it. And I'm just saying that maybe it happens to be the location I live now. There just isn't as many minority groups that and that identify with that type of behavior and activity because it's like a generational thing. But I know that, gang issues are still a problem. But yeah, I don't think that that can be pinned on a rural community. So, um, there's probably the biggest downside I see to rural communities is people don't leave them. A lot of my friends are still exactly where I left them. Um, and for a while that was me too. Like I went to college, I moved back home, and I was totally content to stay right where I was. Um, Things in life changed for me, and I ended up meeting my husband, and we've moved states a couple of times, and we're happy in the life we have. I feel like the husband I have, though, and our interests and our drive, that even if we would have stayed in our hometown, we would have still been, well, he's not from the same town as me, but we're both from small towns in the same like region. Um, I think we still would have excelled in our lives. And So I think that that's less about the community and more about the people, because I know that there's some amazing people who are multiple generations in the same town. And but the reason people tend to stay is it's very familiar. You go into a big city, and I mean, those of us who grew up rurally, like we knew how to get everywhere blindfolded. And like you go to a big city and it's just not the same thing. And so that's really overwhelming. Just not knowing how life kind of works outside of our small town. Um, like maybe if you have aging parents or something like that, you feel like you need to stay and help them out because there aren't as many um options for them to get services and help in a smaller town. A lot of times, like people in small towns, they live on farms and ranches, and those are generational. They stay and work them. They stay and work for their parents' businesses. And why would you leave town when you have a lifetime job and with your parents' small business? I mean, it's totally understandable. So, is it necessarily a bad thing that you're destined to live in the same place for the rest of your life, or is it what you make of it? And I think that that's really just the difference. And as we're seeing a lot of people move back to rural communities with the homestead movement, people are able to work from home and that type of stuff, live on one income. And so we are starting to see more people live back in those rural areas. And so it's really important to make sure you're teaching your kids the benefits of if you stay in town or if you stay close to like your parents or the homestead or whatever, that you make the best of it and not settle into like a comfort groove because that's just not going to be beneficial. And if you are feeling like you're stuck in your small town but still want small town life, like you have permission to move. I know a lot of times there's ties there, but if you're not happy, go. It's okay. And it was the best thing I ever did. Like, it was the best thing when I moved away to college. It was the best thing when I got headhunted for a job and moved away. That's ended up where I met my husband. And then we moved out of the region that we both lived in. And that was the best thing for our families in general. So, um, if it's something that you feel like you need or want to do, it's okay. Everything will work out. Um, so I mean, I talked a little bit about my childhood, but I grew up playing in creeks, running on the ranch, riding quads, um, like I said, going shooting with my friends in the woods, riding our bikes to the water hole. Um, and this isn't like backwoods in the 50s. This was Northern California in the 90s and early 2000s. Like that is legitimately how it is rurally, like in the country. Like country kids hang out that way. Um, you know, uh I remember, like we're just sitting in the woods one time all talking and like a rattlesnake rolls out of the side of the mountain and like three of us had guns out ready to shoot it. And it wasn't unsafe. It wasn't scary because we all had grown up comfortable with weapons. And it was actually safer that we had a gun because it was a pissed off rattlesnake that we were in its space. So, I mean, I love how I grew up and I love how my kids are growing up. I wouldn't I say I wouldn't change a thing about it. I'm sure there's things I'd change, but the overall picture of it, I would not. So I think it's just something to consider. Like I said, if you can't actually live rurally, keep your circle tight. Have your kids exposed to nature. I mean, the outdoors. Like, there's actually a condition called nature deficit disorder that causes like basically ADHD type symptoms in children because they aren't outside enough. That there are tons and tons of people that are having more issues with nearsightedness because our eyes were designed for long distance vision, for hunting and that type of thing. Because that's, what we are as humans, we're hunters. And so children are actually like having their eyesight, like it's not developing properly and stuff. Um, my kids, like I said, my husband and I are the biggest influence in their lives, but like we don't have them locked in the living room like forcing them to spend time with us all the time. Like they have friends, they're out doing things, they have co-op, they have 4-H, they have sports, youth group. We travel together as a family, we learn as a family, we play games, we work together. Like we have a good relationship like that, and it makes my kids where they have better relationships with other adults in their lives, adults in our community, other kids in our community, kids of different ages. Like we go to youth group, or not youth group, our co-op, and like my daughter signed up to help with the little kids during like the last class of the day. Um, and basically it was like 10 kids under 5 and a girl with developmental disabilities who I think is 8 or 9 out there with just my 15-year-old daughter watching all of them. And all the parents were like, sweet, we trust Savannah. Like, let's go hang out and take a break. And like, we all were like sitting around visiting at a table, not having to worry about our small children because we know that another homeschooled kid who is tasked with those types of responsibilities is paying attention to them. And I see that everywhere I go with the homeschooled kids. It doesn't matter how old the kids are, like they all are cool to hang out with each other, and that's something I do not see with like public school kids. And then like I was saying, the responsibility that these kids have. Talking about my daughter at co-op, but I also mentioned earlier that my husband and I went away for the weekend and our teenagers ran the farm. Like I think we have 100 hogs on the property right now. We had customers coming to pick them up. We have, cows and pigs that we have on rotational grazing. We have one cow. We thought she was closer to be due. And then we had the vet come out, but I mean, we're still only like a month out from one of our cows, calving. So he's keeping an eye on her, like our son. There's just a lot that our kids do. And I see that across the board with, rural kids. Another thing is just like less exposure to toxins. They aren't getting exhaust, they aren't getting smog from the cities. They're getting more fresh air, less um, polluted air. They're getting more exposure to, even when like, the allergens and things like that from trees. I mean, that constant exposure to it like builds your immune system and stuff. They're more likely to have access to high quality foods. There is an epidemic of low income rural families, like basically eating from Dollar General all the time. And that, I mean, that can make you really sick. Like, I know somebody who ate that way and ended up with severe pancreatitis. But it is much easier to buy a half a hog and have a garden and that type of stuff if you live rurally. And so the families that are embracing this, and I mean, we just heard this week that if Trump is elected, um, RFK Jr. and him are doing like declaring a state of emergency and looking into like our pharmaceutical and food companies. And it's like, hallelujah, because nobody has done that in a long time. And it needs to be looked at. Like, we need to have, um, it's like farmers are not the enemy, but the system has become the enemy. And we need to seriously look at how the system is. I'm working on my next book, Homestead History. I'm diving really deep into some of these topics, and it is just sad and disturbing, um, how our food system like came to be, how it ended up working into where it is now, and what I would really like to see for it um, coming up. And I didn't know where the next chapter of my book was necessarily going to go, and I'm really hoping that you know a state of emergency on our food and pharmaceutical company is the next step. And however you feel about that one way or another. I don't think it doesn't matter what side you're on. This is a concern, and we should all be on the side of that, however we make that happen. Um, Now, just like I said, when you move to these rural communities and you're wanting to teach your kids to, like embrace that, you need to embrace it too. There are definitely things that, families can do to like, boost rural economies and that type of stuff, but don't bring your politics to a rural community. That's the first way to not make friends and basically create all of the issues that you were moving away from in your new community. Take some time to get to know the people, to get to know the customs, to get to know, I mean, moving from an urban or densely suburban area to a mildly urban or rural or an extremely rural area, it's the same as moving to another country. Like you need to get to know the customs, you need to get to know the people, you need to learn where their values are, and then like really work on getting involved. And um, because I mean, you just can't be trying to change what they have spent 300 years cultivating. Um, and when you move to these new areas, respect our land. Um, I was driving through like the Rockies outside of Denver recently, and they are literally stripping the land like to build houses and stuff. But in some like one place, this house, like the house and the property around the house, they stripped like all the grass and stuff and we're like putting in rock. And it's like you're totally messing up like the ecosystem of this area and the erosion for this and stuff. And there was just no, like, I could see like the rolling hills around it and stuff, and there was just no reason for it. So, a lot of times people move to rural areas and they're like, oh, just respecting the land is not littering. There's more to it. Like, just because there's an empty spot doesn't mean you have to fill it. Like, respect those empty spots because that is part of our landscape. That is part of being rural. Um, be as low impact as you can. If you are going to get a big piece of property, build your house, landscape like an acre around it, and the rest of it, if you are going to farm it and stuff, like put a fence up and put cows out there, but don't just strip it bare. Like there's just no reason for it. Um, so I guess that's my TED Talk for the day. I'm going to get down off my soapbox and go have dinner with my kids. It was great talking to all of you. I'll link my book in the show notes, and any of you that are coming to HOA, make sure you pop by and say hi, because I have some good surprises for you. Have a good one and keep growing. Thank you for joining me today at the Homestead Education, and I hope that I have given you something to think about this week. To help others find me, please comment and leave a review on your favorite podcast player. You can also follow me on Facebook at the Homestead Education and Instagram at Homestead_education. Do you have questions that you would like answered or just want to say hi? Please email me at hello@thehomesteadeducation.com. Until next time, keep growing!